Okay, if we can get started. We have a full program today, so please find your seats and welcome Janet Welcher. Welcome to SPAN. My name is Mark Davis, and I work on the trust team at D.A. Davidson Trust Company, and I'm honored this year to be the president of the Seattle Philanthropic Advisor Network. For those of you that have not been to SPAN, this is actually our 36th conversation with philanthropists and their families, and we've had 4,125 people attend during the last 12 years, so we're hitting some milestones. Today we have 17 people who are new to SPAN, so there's some systems we do here that is a process that those that are here for the first time need to hear. So first, though, I'd love to have them stand. For those of you who are here at SPAN for the first time, please stand and let us recognize you. That's terrific. So we sort of mix it up a little bit. Instead of having lunch served now, we actually serve the lunch after the conversation. So you can enjoy your salads and rolls during this time, but then after the conversation, we have a table talk, which is hosted by a table captain, of which we have a table captain at each table. So if you're not a captain, you know you're not a captain, but if you are a captain, please raise your hand. Please raise your hand. Okay. Yep, looks like we're covered. Good job, Terry Dam. So that conversation will be led, and really the design of the conversation is to be sure that we learn from each other how to be more philanthropic with our clients that have philanthropic intent, and how we can help advise them to do more in our community. So that's the design of the table talk, and it's probably one of the highlights, but today is going to be a real highlight, having the founders of Tableau with us today. So be sure to follow your table captain. When they tell you to do something, they know what they're doing, okay? We do continue to have some fantastic sponsors. Got a lively group here today. We have some amazing sponsors that keep SPAN going. So the two gold sponsors are Bloodworks Northwest and D.A. Davidson Company. Our silver sponsors are Bader Martin, Clark Nuber, Columbia Bank, Del Prado Philanthropy, Ernst & Young, Filament Advisors, Goldman Sachs, Helsel Fetterman, Pratt Legacy Advisors, Seattle Children's Hospital, U.S. Private Wealth Bank, Private Wealth, and Whittier Trust. Please give our sponsors a big round of applause if you would. Did I miss Fulcrum Capital? Terry? Did I miss Fulcrum Capital as a sponsor? We did. Okay, so Fulcrum Capital, sorry. We love having sponsors we missed, trust me, but it won't happen again. I will now introduce Kim Wright. You can have it up now. I will now introduce Kim Wright, who will then introduce and lead the philanthropic conversation today with Heidi and Chris Stolte. Kim was born and raised in Seattle and has worked in the philanthropic sector for 23 years. She is the founding executive director of the Stolte Family Foundation, and early on helped frame the foundation's mission and priorities. Before this, she was the director of family philanthropy at the Seattle Foundation, where she served as trusted advisor for over 125 families. Kim has a national reputation in the field of philanthropic advisory, serving on the advisory committees for the National Center of Family Philanthropy and the Denver Community Foundation. Please welcome Chris, Heidi, and Kim to SPAN.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Mark, and thank you to all the sponsors and all of you for being here and creating this space so that we can talk about how we can help people be more in line with their generosity potential. This is such a fun room for me to be in, as I was at the Seattle Foundation for so long and worked with many of the wealth advisors and attorneys and accountants in the room. So thank you for your long history and the values that you bring to your work. I was here last time with Tom and Sonia Campion, and many of you that attend regularly have been able to hear from some really generous, inspiring philanthropists who are probably in the 15 or 20-year range of their giving. Chris and Heidi are at the earlier years of their giving, so we're going to focus today on some of those early decision points, the lessons that they've learned to date, and some of the motivations they have for giving. I met Chris and Heidi Stolte 5 years ago, and it's been a fun ride. They were really clear early on that connection was important to them. They wanted to be in the community. They wanted to have relationships with thought partners and leaders. And I'm excited for you all to hear from them directly. So with that, let's start at the philanthropic beginning. Chris, how did you get started in this work?
Well, first, thank you everybody for having us. We really appreciate people taking time out of your day to hear our stories, so thank you. In terms of our sort of philanthropic journey, it's been a progression. We got started as far back as I think 2011, when Heidi started getting involved in the community and volunteering. But I'd say that we really sort of gained momentum around 2013, which in reflecting on that, it was a crazy year for us. Our kids were still young. Tableau, the company I had co-founded, had just gone public and was kind of in that hockey stick phase of growth. But at the same time, giving back in philanthropy was important to us, and so we wanted to get started. And what we really needed was somebody to come in from the outside and make things easier for us and sort of drive that conversation. And so for us, that was actually Nicole at Wells Fargo. She knew this was important, and she was working with teammates like Tammy Miller, and they brought the conversation to us, and they really helped us sort of progress through that journey. You know, they would sit down with us and do values exercises and have us really think about what we wanted to achieve with our giving. And then they helped us set up our first giving vehicle, which was a donor-advised fund at the Seattle Foundation. They introduced us to local groups like Social Venture Partners, which gave us a bunch of peers to learn from. And then at that point, Heidi really stepped in for our family and led the charge.
Yeah. Heidi, do you want to share more about your early experiences?
Sure. Before moving to Seattle, I was an elementary school teacher in California. And then when I was here, I did a lot of volunteering. And then I was a full-time mom, stay-at-home mom. And I kept getting drawn to my interest of children and education. And I sought out opportunities to get involved. We were fortunate with the success of Tableau, as Chris mentioned, and we wanted to give back and learn how to do philanthropy well, but we wanted to be intentional. Instead of just responding to mailings from organizations or phone calls or attending just different various fundraising events, we wanted to figure out how to be a little more strategic, because it can be overwhelming to know what to look for and who to fund. I remember early on we went to a philanthropy event through Wells Fargo, and they had this really helpful pamphlet on a list of nonprofits that work in different issue areas, and that was the first time I saw just how many, or realized how many nonprofits are working on these important issues. And that was also a little overwhelming, and wasn't easy for us. I needed help, at least, in knowing how to focus. I would meet people that just approached it differently, and they would learn about an organization, join their board, and just say, that's who I want to fund, that's who I want to engage with. So it was really helpful for me to join SVP in their early learning grant committee to learn more about grant making and to meet other donors that wanted to give back to their community. And with Seattle Foundation, the advisors worked closely with me and provided coaching. And they even had a desk for me that I could come use once a week, which was really helpful in those early years. And as we engaged more and thought about what we want to do long term, what we wanted to accomplish, and how much we wanted to put aside, we decided to expand our giving vehicles and start our private foundation.
Great. Can you talk about the areas of interest that you have? How did you choose your 3 funding pillars, and what are you currently working on?
I can start. So we have 3 pillars at our foundation: climate, education, and civic engagement. And I'll start by talking about climate, and then I'll turn it over to Heidi to talk about education. So, it's just a fact that the way we produce and consume energy is destroying our planet. And my background is data and analysis. I've seen enough data to know this is a problem. I have a high degree of confidence in that. And so there's an urgency that has drawn us to that problem. At the same time, we see it as an opportunity. Addressing climate change is going to require us to redesign and rethink a number of things. And it turns out, like a lot of the solutions to climate change, they're just better, right? They reduce pollution, they lead to more livable cities and better buildings and job creation. And so it's that combination of urgency and opportunity that has got us excited about investing in that pillar. We've started by focusing our work in the Pacific Northwest. We have this goal of contributing to the efforts to get Washington and Oregon 100% clean from the perspective of carbon emissions. And that means work across industrial processes, transportation, the electric grid, just all aspects of doing that. And we've been able to work with some really great groups like Climate Solutions and the Washington Environment Council, UW, Clean Energy Transition Institute. And we have real momentum building in Washington and Oregon. And I think we have a huge opportunity to be leaders in the move to 100% clean. So it's been really exciting to be able to be part of that work. You want to talk about education?
Sure. As I described before, my background was a natural fit for caring about funding education. Through my various teaching jobs and even volunteering in my kids' public school classroom, I saw firsthand that there can be a wide gap in children's preparedness when they come into kindergarten, and often they don't catch up. And this can be difficult for the students and very stressful, but also for the teachers that are teaching such a wide range. When I was getting involved with the SVP's Early Learning Grant Committee, I further learned the importance of giving children and families a strong foundation in the early years. I learned, for example, that by age 5, the brain is developed by 92%, so it's a really critical time. I was eager to put my past experience and knowledge to be hands-on and learning about organizations and contributing to closing that opportunity and achievement gap for children. In 2016, Kim and some other advisors worked closely with me to develop a strategic plan and narrow my focus with education giving to have impact, and we decided to give grants in early learning and for programs trying to eliminate summer learning loss. And we had 2 formal grant cycles to learn from, and we invited organizations to apply, and we funded organizations doing direct service, but also ones working on systems change, and some organizations that were small, some were large, and we also had 2 capacity building grants. Our education funding has evolved, and since last summer we brought on Anna Guarneri as our program officer, and we've been working on a strategic planning process with her expertise and guidance, and it's been really exciting. We've been talking to grantees and stakeholders as part of that process to refine our focus further. And it just happens that this week we are unveiling our new education funding plans, and our main focus will be the role that families play in their children's development and learning. And we're looking to support culturally responsive home visiting programs and programs that engage families in school and community-based organizations. And originally we were funding just in King County, but now we're looking outside of King County to follow where the need is, because of the high cost of living. We're seeing that families are being pushed out of Seattle and even King County. So we're taking that into account.
And I can dive in on our 3rd pillar, which is civic engagement. To be honest, this is sort of our least mature of the 3 pillars. We've focused a lot of our strategy time on climate and education. But the premise here is we're big fans of our democracy and we want it to thrive. And for that to happen, we need shared democratic norms. We need deep civic engagement. We need things like, strong public discourse on our societal challenges, and we need things like rock-solid voting rights. And so this is an area that we care a lot about, and we're working on finding out how we can most effectively contribute. We've had a lot of success working through local groups like the Washington Progress Alliance, But we're spending this year trying to apply the same strategy time to this area and make sure we understand our role and where we can most effectively contribute.
So 3 really important areas, timely, critical, important for us to be deeply engaged and committed. I took this question from last time. People really like to know, how is it working together on this work?
I'm going to go with great on that one. No, it is really great. We take an approach, I'd probably call it a combination of divide and conquer and close collaboration. We both have different pillars that we're more focused on. I spend more of my time on climate, Heidi spends more of her time on education, and we're both contributing to the civic engagement effort. But at the same time, we do a lot of work together. We've been doing a lot of the learning together, both about our pillars and just how do we do effective grant making. And we make sure to stay involved in each other's strategies. We participate in the strategy process, and I got to tell you, when I hit a hard question, my first sounding board is Heidi. And that's got to be one of the really great parts of this philanthropic journey, is the chance to work together. So I'm sticking with great.
I agree. As Chris said, we're working on different issue areas, and we're still learning what and how to share with each other, because there's just a lot of information and a lot that we're doing and learning. And just to add, I lean on Chris's business experience to help as we're building our foundation. It's been really helpful.
So we talk a lot as a group, as a team, about how change happens, about impact, about how we can be good partners. Heidi, can you talk about how you approach both the type and level of funding?
Sure. We're learning best practices, and some that have been done for a while and some that are newer. And I'll talk about 4 things. One is we want to right-size expectations. We know that we can't solve poverty or education equity with a $25,000 grant. And different organizations are at different stages, and we engage more with larger grants and with those organizations, and we're more hands-off with smaller ones. And we really are thoughtful about what we're asking for when they're applying or when we're assessing them based on their different stages and the amount that we're giving. And 2, we're looking more at multi-year grant making so that organizations aren't spending so much of their time fundraising year after year, but can be out doing the work. And 3, we're trying to give flexible funding. If grants are really restrictive, organizations don't have the flexibility to use their funds for what they need, such as the infrastructure for their work, keeping the lights on, accounting help, buying a printer even. So we often give general operating grants so they have that flexibility. And I think it's natural to want to know where our money is going, and so we're learning to trust organizations to know that they know what's best for doing their work. And I think that's just something that has been a part of the process in our learning journey. And 4, we're thoughtful on outcomes, and we're working with grantees to define measures of success and to match the level and type of investment that we're making.
Great. And Heidi mentioned this, Chris, we lean on sometimes your business experience. With that background, what's one thing that surprises you about the nonprofit sector?
That's a good question. It has been fun kind of moving from my background with startups and into the philanthropic sector, because there's a lot of similarities and there's a lot of differences. You use the word surprise, and if I had to go with one thing, I'd probably say it's how hard I see it for our grantees to invest in their people and in the longer term aspects of their vision. When I think back on my own startup experience, we were a venture capital backed startup, and our VCs were actually pretty awesome. You know, they definitely were tough on us at times and held us accountable and asked lots of questions. But when they signed up on the journey with us, they knew they were signing up on a journey that was going to take at least a decade. And they came into it with that patient mindset. And that meant that it wasn't just us talking about those types of investments. They were asking us, are you investing enough in your people? Are you able to hire great people, retain them, develop them? And they were asking us about, you know, we want to hear what you're working on this year, but are you able to do the work to set yourselves up to be successful for the work you need to do in 3 years? And when I talk with our grantees, they totally get the value of this. But they're constrained by their funding, or at least in a lot of the cases I've seen, the funding makes it hard, right? When you have unpredictable funding from year to year, but you're looking at hiring somebody, you know, how do you balance that? How do you think about how you're going to pay their salary next year if you only have the grant this year? Or if you have restricted funding, or if you have project-only funding, how do you earmark some of that so you can go and do that work you know you need to do to set yourself up for the future? And so it's been really interesting for me to see how challenging that has been. And we're trying to approach it differently. We're trying to ask the question of like, what do you think you need to be doing that you're not? And is that an area where we can help? We're trying to work with our grantees and saying like, how do we structure this funding so you feel you have the flexibility and the latitude to invest in your own people, to hire the great people, to retain them, to develop them?
I think that's a really important point. Having been in the sector for a while, we've evolved to understanding that 3 to 5 year grants are important, but really we know some of these challenges, to tackle them, the complexities of the challenges, it's gonna take 10 to 20 years. So how can we be good partners? How can we truly invest in the capacity needs that organizations have? And I feel fortunate to be able to be working with you and to hear both of you ask leaders in the community, what do you need? What do you need, not just for the short term, but like what gets in the way for you being able to look at long-term solutions? Heidi, one of the things that you've been talking about since I met you was wanting to do philanthropy differently. Can you talk about what that means for you?
Sure. I don't know if I talked about it from the beginning, but we have been talking about it. We listen and learn. It's important to hear from others and understand what goes on in the community. And we hear from different sources that philanthropy needs to change, and we don't want to exacerbate the inequity that we're trying to solve. And so we're questioning traditional grant making and why things are done the way they are. If they're not moving the needle and things aren't getting better in society, then let's look at trying to do things differently. And one of those things could be putting community voice more at the center. Community-based organizations have a huge benefit. They have relationships and trust with the community that they're working with and with their families. But sometimes it's harder for them to get funding, or other smaller organizations if they don't have a grant writer, for example, but they have huge potential. And we like to fund a diversity of organizations, small, large, POC-led, that's person of color-led organizations, organizations working on systems, research, policy, and we feel that they all have a contribution to support the whole ecosystem.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit about the core principles that anchor your work?
Sure, I'll start off on this. So this is actually something I think is really important. Like, in addition to having pillars that we focus on, I think it's really important for an organization to have some set of principles that drive your work. We did this a lot at Tableau, and we're doing it at our foundation. And so we've identified, I think it's 7 different principles that we try and reflect on and apply when we're doing our work. I'll talk about a couple, and then maybe Heidi can jump in and talk about a couple. And so one example is just being impact-driven, which sounds fairly obvious, right? I mean, we get into this work because we want to solve big problems. But by having that as a principle, it forces us to reflect on the impact we're trying to achieve. And we've picked some big problems to work on, you know, education and climate, and we have limited resources and capacity. And so if we want to be impact-driven, it means we have to take the time to really figure out our strategy and figure out our theory of change and make sure we know what our role is in the broader community and where the leverage is. It also means that we have to realize that we're part of an ecosystem of funders. And we have to understand what other people are trying to fund, how they're working, and how we can be aligned with them. And so that principle just helps us reflect on that and remind ourselves to do those things. A similar one I would say is this idea of being guided by research. Heidi and I are both really big fans when we kind of get into a new area of really understanding the best practices and the research, and then trying to leverage that. And so, you know, for example, in education, there's been a lot of work done on the efficacy and effectiveness of different programs. So how do we make sure we're aware of it and position our grantees to be aware of it so they can leverage that work? We also, you know, we think it's really important to look for gaps that we can fill and help out on. And actually, I can tell you a story from climate. A couple years ago, when we got involved in the climate area, I met a woman named Eileen Quigley, who's been doing work in the climate space for quite a number of years. And she was asking some questions which I thought were great. You know, they're sort of like, as we move Washington and Oregon to being 100% clean, do we understand sort of the nuances of all the different technical and economic pathways we might take, or implications that the different pathways we might take would have? It's the type of question you kind of hope the answer is to, oh yeah, we got that. But it turns out that as she dove in deeper and looked at all the studies that had been done nationally and convened working groups, and we all looked at this, we realized there were some unanswered questions that would affect policy in the Pacific Northwest. And so she decided to start up a nonprofit, and we were lucky enough to be sort of a seed funder to help her get that off the ground. And now they're up and running, and they just finished their first study, and it actually informs, you know, some of the key decisions we're going to have to make in the next couple of years. And they have the mission to kind of keep doing that work for the next couple of years. And so that's another example of that principle applying to our work, and it's pretty exciting. Do you want to talk about a couple?
Sure, I'll just talk about a couple. One is always learning. We believe we should always be learning from and reflecting on our work and evolving our strategy and approach based on those learnings. We have a strong sense of curiosity, and we like to question things and not just follow the pack. And we listen to different points of view, such as we learn from the Gates Foundation, UW Research, as well as from blogs like Fake Equity and Vule's Nonprofit AF. We want to always grow and reflect, and we don't want to be the funder that just keeps chasing the next big thing, but at the same time, we don't want to get stuck on something if it's not being effective. And we keep an eye on evolving needs of the ecosystem. We keep using that word, I don't know why, and see how we fit and where do we need to adjust. And we know we don't have all the answers. Another value of ours is being equity-oriented, which is really important these days. We aspire to promote more just, fair, and equitable outcomes and apply racial and economic equity lenses to our work. In education, the data clearly shows disparities are related to race and economic opportunity. So we started early looking to focus on communities of color. Some specifics that I like to mention of that we're doing is I was part of a cohort, a white privilege, wealth privilege cohort for a year, and we started off by learning about our whiteness, then structural racism, and then how philanthropy can intersect and how can we take action. And that was really powerful to be a part of that. Some of us are attending racial equity for grant makers meetings through Philanthropy Northwest. We're reading articles, books, going to events. A book such as Decolonizing Wealth by Edgar Villanueva is one that we've been reading. And we have discussions within our team and with our grantee partners, and we're trying to embed it into our grant-making strategies, such as looking at how many POC-led organizations that we fund. We know we can do more, and Kim and I are happy to share more later with you if you want.
Yeah. Thank you, Heidi. Very important points. No, it's okay. That's fine. Chris, what have been some of the obstacles that you've experienced?
I'd say one of the biggest obstacles has been sort of the pure mechanics of philanthropy. I'm guessing most of the people in this room know, like, this is a complicated field. Like, when you come in from the outside, you've got C3 versus C4, you've got MRI versus PRI versus SRI, you've got required minimum distribution. There's a lot of stuff to get your head around. And it was pretty intimidating. So it was really great to have advisors that helped us work through that. One of the interesting things I've found is that as we've gone through and understood the space more, we've discovered a lot of opportunities for impact we didn't realize existed. One example I'll give is sort of political giving or advocacy. To be honest, you know, neither Heidi or I think I can say this pretty confidently, were ever interested in political giving. Like, this is just not our thing. But as we realized, if we wanted to have impact on the issue areas we cared about, we were going to have to learn this space and understand it. And so in addition to the work we do through our foundation, we also do work directly through our family for advocacy and candidate support, because it really matters, you know, who you elect and the policies they enact. And now that we're on the other side of that, it's been really rewarding, and we've learned a lot about how important that is to the work we're doing. A similar thing I would point out is sort of the opportunity that's there in the money you're not granting. You know, at some point, you know, every year we're giving away 5 to 10% of our assets, and somebody asked me the question, so what's the other 90% doing? And that struck me as a really great question. You know, there's sort of step one is hopefully no harm, right? Like, just make sure we've got it, but it's not always obvious, right? So just making sure we've got it socially responsibly invested and it's aligned with the efforts we're doing. But then we also started to dig in and look at things like program-related investments. And if you look in a space like climate, one of the really big challenges we have is there is not enough capital going into early stage clean energy research. It's just nowhere close to where it needs to be. And so that 90% of philanthropic capital can be helping. And we actually found this great group, Prime Coalition, that came out of MIT, and they've set up a venture capital firm that is doing risky early stage clean energy research, and they've specifically set it up to support PRI investments from philanthropies. And so it's opportunities like that that have got us really excited about sort of the full breadth of things we can do. So obstacle and opportunity.
And I'll just take a moment to share a little story about that. We were introduced to Prime Coalition by Natalie Holm, and it just reminds me to don't underestimate the power of this space and of sharing what you're working on with your fellow colleagues and fellow wealth advisors, because someone like Kim might be standing right around you and listening and thinking, I gotta take that back to people that I'm working with. So this is fun. How are you engaging your kids in these discussions and in this work?
Sure, I'll answer that. It's been important to us to raise appreciative, grounded, global-minded kids that have awareness of the world around them and their privilege. And we talk about it a lot. We don't want to raise entitled, spoiled kids. Our kids are now 10 and 13, but we sought out opportunities early on to learn from others. Nicole and Kim gave us books such as Strangers in Paradise or Raised Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise, and they were helpful. And lately we've been exposing them to the foundation. We talk about our work a lot at home and starting to bring them to events and expose them to it. I'm still struggling a little bit with the guilt and other feelings about having wealth since we didn't grow up with it. And it's a great responsibility, but it's also a great opportunity, as Chris kind of alluded to earlier, that we can have impact in making this world a better place. So it can be overwhelming and exciting at the same time. Our wealth advisor, Nicole, has been supporting us, and recently have been fortunate to be part of a wealth discussion group with other women to talk about challenges with having wealth and having our kids grow up with a healthy relationship with money. So that's been great to just have some of those practical advisement. Some other things we've done with our kids are giving them allowance, having a moon jar at the beginning where they had the share or the spend, share, save, and having them practice with managing money and making good decisions. We try to model thoughtful spending, not being too materialistic, but just, if we have what we need, not going too far beyond that, but also having some joy with being so fortunate. At Christmas, it was exciting to see. We decided to collectively give as a family and choose some nonprofits that we would give to. And we were really excited to see them being super engaged and thoughtful, and to see some of the values that we hope that we're passing on are showing up in their actions and interests. So it's rewarding that it's already starting to pay off. And I have been getting asked this, or I know this is something that other people think about when they have wealth and they're raising kids. So it's been great to have some tools and advisement along the way.
Great. And I know we want to be able to have a couple of questions, so can you maybe share a couple of the key lessons that you've learned, and then we'll look to you all for the questions you may have?
I can go first. I think probably one of the key lessons for me is just around how I partner and show up with our grantees. My sort of natural approach is I'm a pretty inquisitive, hands-on person, and I'm not tend to be the one who's going to be a passive funder or just join a board. My preferred mode of operation is to closely partner with our grantees and be thinking partners and ask lots of questions. And there have been cases where that's been really great, and it's led to some really productive partnerships, and we've been able to start up new nonprofits or work on funding coalitions or look at different cross-sector partnerships. And so I encourage people to seize those opportunities where they are. I've also had to learn that that's not always the best way for me to show up. I'm comfortable with it, but that doesn't mean that the grantees are comfortable with it. And I've had to learn, to be reminded of the power imbalance that can exist in that relationship, and that I need to sort of develop a bit of self-awareness and realize, how should I be showing up, and what is the right relationship in each different context. And so calling it a lesson is probably a little premature. I'm in that learning voyage, but it has definitely been something that I've had to focus on.
Yeah, I've learned to be patient with yourself and talk to other people in philanthropy and pick their brains. There isn't a guidebook for doing this work. but there are people willing to help, as Kim mentioned, and we're not going to get it perfect, but we just need to try things. I also think it was helpful to work closely with advisors and make strategic plans to narrow down our focus. That's one of the first things the few people that have asked for my advice so far, I think it helps when you can have some focus in your work and be effective. And being able to have consultants early on before we were ready to hire staff was really great to have as well. And lastly, I think we all bring value to this work. At first, I was intimidated working alongside business leaders at SVP, and I knew that's who would join boards, and I didn't know what I could add, but I have learned that with my experience of being a parent, teacher, and volunteer, that I do have important insight, and I think we all have something to contribute.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris and Heidi. Are there any questions from the audience? Hi, Srilata, yes. Yeah, I'll take the first one. So we're still developing our practice and our criteria around how we approach racial equity criteria. We know that there are incredible grassroots organizations that need more funding. We believe that community has a lot of solutions, and we also know that there's areas and pockets where there are still white-led groups who work very competently with communities of color. So we've just started on this journey. We looked at our education portfolio and realized that 48% of the organizations that we'd funded in our first few years were led by people of color. We're talking to other funders and looking at what Social Justice Fund, Seattle Foundation defines as POC-led. It's still early. It's early for the private foundation field to have an answer to that yet, but we're looking at private foundations and other foundations that are creating some criteria. And with our recent education RFP that went out yesterday, and it's on our website, we know, and Anna's leading us in this process, that we have to come up with selection criteria. So one of the first things we've done is we've really embedded it into the RFP. It's very clear that a priority area focus for us is going to be communities of color and organizations working really effectively to support communities of color. So it's still a place that we're working on.
And I'll take the second part of that question. I mean, I'll start by saying it's not obvious to me that our foundation will even necessarily be around when our kids get older. I mean, we have to look at our issue areas and decide what timeline can we have the most impact on. So to me, that's an open question. And then I think our kids' role is also an open question. We're early on the voyage with them, and we're early on the voyage with the foundation. So we've got to start with figuring out what is the path to having the most impact and sort of the best outcome for the community, and then what role does our family continue to play in that. But I can't even guarantee we won't have to spend down earlier. So,
Other thing I'll add is I've been starting to learn from others is that our kids may have interest in working with the foundation, and they may have other things that they want to pursue. So I think we have to take that into account. But we're at least exposing them to giving in any way that they want to do it.
One thing that I'll add there, if it's okay, not my kids, but touchy subject. We're talking about the fact that money is not the highest value tool. So we're trying to bring some of what we're learning and recognizing into our discussions with the kids. Do we have time for one more? Okay. Don't be shy. Yes. Hi, Bill.
I'm on the board of a very small nonprofit organization that really appreciates funders who understand the value of unrestricted money, and it's great. They get a lot for their grants from us. But I'm wondering if you have a longer-term strategy that involves you guys continuing to fund smaller organizations, or do you just sort of see yourself as doing this now, but maybe in 5 or 10 years you're just going to gravitate, for perhaps a lot of good reasons, to larger, more established organizations, which ironically could include the ones that become well-established because you've funded them early. But it seems like a very enlightened approach you've taken, and I was wondering if you thought consciously about it, or if it just sort of is the profile of how you grant some to larger, some to smaller currently, and it may not exist in the years going forward.
I can start answering that, and hopefully Kim can chime in. That's a really good question, and one I don't think we fully have decided on or thought through, so thank you for asking that. One way I can see us working is such as with our education funding is we want to we realize that those smaller or community-based organizations have a role. So even if we're working, let's say, with a school district and supporting a program, but really using or working with those smaller organizations, grassroots organizations as partners, and not just taking from them and wanting to get advisement from them and how to work in those communities, but really giving them a grant or working with them in some way as we're going forward, because we are interested in doing larger grants and having great impact with certain organizations, so we can have more of a difference. Maybe Kim can add something.
No, I mean, I think when we're talking about the clarity that we have in the data around POC-led organizations that we funded has been specifically in our education pillar, but we want to look holistically at the foundation resources that are going out. So we are funding well-known, strong, mid-size, and large organizations for really key specific work. And again, it's early on in the journey, and we want to look at what the data says where the most change can happen. So we'll be reflecting on this regularly. Thank you.
As a observant of 36 of these conversations, I think this is the best prepared we've ever had. Please give Heidi, Chris, and Kim a big round of applause.